Okay, Rabotai, we're on 11A Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, 11A1 if you're following in the art scroll. We are doing the shiur from Miami due to the wedding for the Shatrit and LeBeau's family. But like the Pasuk says, "Ubelechtecha baderech," a person has to take the words of Torah with them wherever they go. They're never off from studying Torah. We always have to be studying Torah. And the first one to teach to us last week was Joey, listening to the class while he was on the plane. Okay, so let's go. Mishnah says as follows. Osin ma'akeh legag ulemirpeset. So let's back up. I have to teach you something a little bit about this before we get into it. Because the Mefarshim tell us one simple thing. There's a mitzvah in the Torah that a person has an obligation to build a ma'akeh, a fence, a rail and a fence around the high place, around the rooftops of their home. So a lot of times people don't realize that this is actually a mitzvah from the Torah. So if you have a roof deck in your house, or if you own an apartment building, if you own an apartment in an apartment building, and you have access to the roof because you're the top apartment, as an example, or if something along those lines, an elevated place, the halacha is a person needs to build a ma'akeh. They need to build a guardrail around so that nobody falls. Like the pasuk says, "Lo yeh damim bebeitecha." There should not be any blood in your home, i.e., that blood is on your hands if someone falls. Now, we are not talking about in our Mishnah that kind of ma'akeh, a ma'akeh which is biblically mandated, okay? Because that ma'akeh a person will be allowed to do, even on Chol HaMoed and even on the highest level. However, the Mishnah over here is talking about a ma'akeh which is not obligatory min haTorah. Says the Mishnah, Osin ma'akeh legag u'lemirpeset. We do a ma'akeh for a rooftop and a mirpeset, which is for like a porch. Ma'aseh hediot, the halacha is that the way it's done is it has to be done in the way of that anyone could build. Avalo ma'aseh uman, not in the work, not in the style of activity or expertise that's required from a master craftsman. Okay, so I told you last class that we really had kind of smoothed over something without actually getting into it. We had this idea that a person has to stitch in a certain way, because the other way is for a craftsman, and then we said that the person should stitch in a way which is not professional. So we had all these different ideas, but we really actually never discovered what the reason is. Why in the world is it a problem to do this, to do something like an uman? So we're going to kind of get into that a little bit now. So says the Mishnah, it has to be done like an amateurish way on Chol HaMoed, but not the work of someone that actually knows what they're doing as a professional. Shafin et hasidakim, we're allowed to Leshafot means to make something smooth. So we can smooth over by smearing into sedek, which means a crack. Okay? We can smooth plaster over those cracks. And you could flatten it, or you could roll over it from the word ma'agal, right? Or igul, which is something which is rounded. You can flatten it with using like a rolling pin or some such item. Biyad ubaregel. You could do it with your hand or with your foot. So that's a strange thing. What does it mean you could do it with your hand or with your foot? The Mefarshim explain that with the hand or with the foot means that it's being done in a way with a tool that was used either for the hand or for the foot. Avalo b'machlatzayim, but not with Someone needs to mute. Mechila. Okay? So, but says the halacha, not with machlatzayim. We need someone needs to go on mute, guys. Someone's talking in the background.
Avi, muted. Okay.
All right. So says the Gemara. No machlatzayim. So what is machlatzayim? If we take a look, we'll see. If you look at Rashi and others, you'll see that there's a machloket exactly what this machlatzayim actually is. Either it means, so yad and regel was some form of tool that we used with the hand or with the foot. So either a tool to hit down the plaster to make it smooth, or even something to use with the foot to make it smooth. Now, this is an interesting thing because there's a machloket what kind of cracks we're talking about. These cracks are either the cracks of the floor of an oven or the cracks on the ceiling. So one of the opinions is that machlatzayim, this item of the machlatzayim is almost like a boot that you would put on, and this boot would then be something that you stepped on the plaster, and that would make sure that the plaster not only was smooth but also was squeezed into the floor. So it's interesting because obviously you can't hold that it's machlatzayim if you hold that the cracks we're talking about are on the ceiling of a house, unless we're talking about sealing them from on the rooftop. Okay, but either way, the machlatzayim is a specific type of a tool. Either one opinion says it's a trowel, if you want to know what that is. That's it looks like a little mini type of a shovel, but it has, instead of a flat end, it looks like a triangle that comes to a point. And that's usually actually what you see people using when they're doing any sort of plaster work, like in a kitchen or in a bathroom. They're using this little kind of triangular tool, which is called a trowel. So I have a little bit machlatzayim, but not with machlatzayim. The Mishnah says, Hatzir v'hatzinor v'hakoreh v'hamaru v'hamaftech shenishberu. So, just to be clear, what is a tzir and a tzinor? Tzinor always means a pipe. So when you imagine a pipe, what are you imagining? You're imagining something with a circle like that, okay? Tzir is actually the door, the stick that comes out on the edge of the door. So in other words, they used to build on the door a little metal pole, tiny thing that goes like this, okay? It would be built on the edge of the door. That would sit, okay, in the socket, which is the tzinor, the pipe that sat at the bottom. And on that, the door would rotate and open or close, okay? So let's say the tzir or the tzinor, v'hakoreh. Sometimes koreh means a roof over here because we're talking about a door. Commentators explain that that koreh means the roof, so to speak, of the door. What's the roof of the door? It's the top piece of the door frame called a lintel. Okay, v'hamanul and the lock, v'hamaftech and the key itself, shenishberu. Let's say they broke. Mitaknan b'moed, you're allowed to fix it on chol moed, right? Why you're allowed to fix it on chol moed? Because you need to enter into the house, and as well you need your door to be functional for the sake of safety. Ubilvad shlo yitkaven la'asot melachto b'moed. The only thing that you can't do is you can't say to yourself, listen, you know something, I want to get all these other things done. I'm going to leave this work for the holiday because for chol moed because I know I'm allowed to do it. So if a person's leaving it for the chol moed, then that's a problem. Says the Mishnah. V'chol kevashim, and all pickled foods. Now, just to be clear, what does it mean, pickled food? So, kvisha is a general term that relates to when a person takes any sort of object and sticks it in water and salt. Okay, so that process actually preserves, whether it's vegetables or other things. So you might be thinking specifically, of pink cauliflower, but it can be really anything is pickled in brine or in vinegar. Chol kivashi, anything pickled food that you're going to eat from them on the holiday. Kovshan, you're allowed to do that. Kibush, you're allowed to pickle them. Gemara says, okay, hechi dami maaseh hidyot. Okay, you just told me that when I'm building the ma'akeh, the roof, the railing around the roof, that I have to have, it has to be the work of a person who's not a uman. Okay, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yosef says, behutza vedafna. It means that what kind of a railing are we talking about? It means we've come up across this already many times. Hutza vedafna. It's the pieces of the palm tree, and as well laurel, which is a kind of an evergreen bush that they would use all the time. Now, why is this used all the time? Because of the nature of these two things. One was a little bit stiff, but still had some give, and the other one was like a leaf. It would be used all the time to be able to make these makeshift walls. As an example, the Gemara in Masechet Baba Batra talks about the fact that when two people live next to each other, they're not allowed to be looking into each other's yards. They have to have privacy, okay? So the law of privacy dictates that you have to have a wall between the two people. Gemara says, a guy comes to his neighbor and says, look, I want to build a wall. The wall's going to be $10,000. Give me $5,000, okay? Because I'm building a brick wall. $5,000 me, $5,000 for you. Gemara says he could tell him, look, I have an obligation to build a wall, but I'm happy to build a wall of hutza v'dafna, of laurel and palm fronds. Instead of spending $5,000, I'll spend $5. So hutza v'dafna was always something that was spoken about with regards to building a wall cheaply in a way that anyone could do. So says the Gemara over here, that's also what it means if a person wants to build this kind of a wall on Chol HaMoed for a exposed area to let people know that you shouldn't walk in a certain area, they're able to do so. I don't know if Jonah, if you remember, we had a question on this with regards to Sukkot on the rooftop in Israel, if I'm not mistaken. All right? So, Jonah, when you'll listen to this, you'll remember that you asked this question, and this was the answer. Okay? So, we talked about this, creating these little mini walls around to be able to mark at least that this was not a place that a person should go. Okay, says the Gemara. B'matnita tana. In the Braita we learned, tsar b'tzror ve'enotach betit. A person is tsar. The word tzror means a rock. Okay, tzrorot means small rocks. So tsar b'tzror means, like from the Lashon hatzur tamim pa'olo. Okay, tsar b'tzror, the person would pile stone on top of stone. Ve'enotach betit, but he's not putting the mortar or the cement between the stones to be able to make it a professional wall. I think I mentioned to you once, this idea of tsar b'tzror is truly an amateurish job. I know because I once went with family on Sukkot on a hike, and they all brought food, and I don't eat anything or drink anything out of the sukkah if I can. So here we are midway through the hike, and there's nothing, there's nowhere for me to eat. And everyone, I think I would have been fine if everyone else was not eating. But once everyone else is eating, your stomach juices start flowing. I'm very hungry. I have no sukkah. So what did I do on Chol Moed? I grabbed a bunch of rocks. I started piling the rocks together. There was a tree and there was like a stone wall. So I piled rocks in between the tree and the stone. So that was one wall. Then I had the back stone wall. And then the other wall as well, I piled rocks. So by building those, the big wall and the little small wall, because you're allowed to have 2.5 walls, I was able to build myself a little sukkah. I'm on a hike, so there's plenty of fallen wood around. I built myself a little item, climbed right in it, and in a matter of maybe 10 minutes, I had built myself a kosher sukkah. So are you allowed to build tsar b'tzror on a Chol HaMoed? Someone asked me at the time, they're like, you built something, Chol HaMoed, you allowed to do that? I said, yeah, look at this Gemara, tsar b'tzror, ve'enotach betit, but you can't cement those stones together in building a wall for this ma'akeh that we're referring to over here, which is a non-obligatory ma'akeh. If it was an obligatory ma'akeh, you would even be able to do it with what's called ma'aseh uman. The Mishnah continues, Shafin et hasedakinu ma'agilin otan b'ma'agela. You're able to put plaster over the crack. So first you would just put the plaster on the crack, and then you flatten it using like a kind of like a rolling pin, and that kind of smooths out the floor, either the floor of the oven or the rooftop of the house. Okay, and you're allowed to do it, as we said, biyadu beregel, but not with machlatzayim. The Gemara says, Hashta b'magila amrit shari. If you're telling me that you're able to seal it with a roller, biyadu beregel mibayeh, you have to tell me that you're able to do it using a hand or a foot. Now, obviously, when a person takes a hand or a foot and he just goes like this, obviously that's less of a professional job than rolling it over with a roller. So why, once you told me that you could use a roller, did you have to tell me that you could do it b'yad or b'regel? The Gemara says, Hachi ka'amad, this is what it means. Shafin et hasedakim magiluntan ke'en ma'agela b'yad or b'regel. A person is able to smear plaster over the cracks, and then he's able to use his hand or his foot to flatten them like otan ke'en magela, as you would do with a roller. Avalo v'machlatzayim, but not with machlatzayim. That you're not able to do. So at this point, the Gemara is actually reverting, moving back away from. Someone needs to mute, guys. The Gemara is again reverting back away from the idea that a roller is mutar, because if a roller is mutar, why would you then tell me bayadu baregel is okay, just to do it with your hand or with your foot? Okay, so if at this point in the Gemara, the way we're understanding it now is that machlatzayim is the highest form of professional work. Under that is roller. Under that is yad ubaregel. So the Gemara says you're able to use your hands and feet like a roller, but not with machlatzayim. And that was a specific tool that they would use, and that tool was considered to be like the gold standard. So that's what you're not allowed to do on Chol HaMoed. Gemara continues, Hatzir v'atzinor v'akoreh v'amanu v'amaftech shenishberu, any part of the door basically, which is ensuring your safety. Mitaknan b'moed, you're able to fix it on the moed. Gemara says, hold on. Viraminu, let me ask you a question. The Mishnah continues and says, Ad yamav haya patish makeh b'Yerushalayim, until he came along, okay, to give a different ruling. So, right, the halacha was that you'd hear hammers banging all the time in Yerushalayim. Okay, that's what the Gemara is saying. So, this was kind of eventually stopped by Gezerah from Yochanan Kohen Gadol. We'll see soon in the next Mishnah. And he did not allow any type of tools to be used on the Moed because it would ruin the sound of the holiday. Okay? Now, what about the fact that those tools are being used in a proper and in a kosher way? All right? So since that's the case, since there's work that's mutar, how could Yochanan Kohen Gadol not allow the fixing of something on Chol HaMoed? You see over here that he disallowed the use of all of these tools. Ad Yamav'in, until Yochanan Kohen Gadol came along and forbid the sound of work, because it sounds like Chol HaMoed is being desecrated by the construction that it sounds like is happening, even though it's actually mutar. Okay, so the Gemara says, Ad Yamav'in, Mikan va'elech, no, lo. Up until his days, it was, they were able to do it. But from then on, no. So if we're now after Yochanan Kohen Gadol, okay, so then how are we saying that you're able to fix these things that would need tools to be able to fix them? How are you able to do that? Because once his Gezerah was in effect, it would then be Asur. The Gemara says, Lo kasha, kan b'denafche. When we're talking about Yochanan Kohen Gadol, he's talking about the hammering down on of a blacksmith. Now, if you take a blacksmith, I don't know if you ever saw in a movie or in a film about medieval tactics of making a sword. But what they would do is they would take the sword and they would heat it up, and then they would take this giant mallet, like a metal mallet, and they would be banging on the steel on top of an anvil. An anvil, you might remember from Wile E. Coyote attempting to drop it on Roadrunner, but always somehow managing to drop it on his own toe. Okay?
Rabbi,
yeah.
He's not alluding to all the work that we talked about, the door, the roof, the side of the wall, the plastering. Is he alluding to all those?
So that's what the Gemara is saying over here. Kan b'denafchi. Yochanan Kohen Gadol was talking about the banging of an anvil, which is the sound, the massive banging sound, which sounds like construction. But over here, kan b'denagri, this is more like carpentry type tools, okay? So those type of tools don't make the same level of noise and sound. So Yochanan Kohen Gadol never forbid, so that's what the Gemara is answering, exactly like you're saying, Joey, that we never forbid.
Right. He didn't say that though? Or did you just know that he said that?
The Gemara is answering from the contradiction between the Mishnayot, that the difference between Yochanan Kohen Gadol's takana and his gezerah, his edict, and this was that this is allowed because it wasn't that heavy banging of the anvil that he held was asur, because it ruined the feeling of Chol HaMoed. Okay.
Right, so they clarified that.
The Gemara just clarified that now here. And the way we clarify that is by finding this contradiction between the Mishnayot, and the resolution is, it must be that there was a kind of banging and whatever noise that he was oser, that we allowed, and that was mutar, okay? On a surface level, okay, we're going to get to the Mishnah, and we'll see something else. On a surface level, there are other answers that you could have thought about for this question, by the way. So we're going to have to figure out why is it specifically that we chose to use this answer when there are other answers that are immediately available to solve this contradiction? The Gemara says, Matkif la Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda asked on this specific answer, Yomeru kala rabba asir, kala zutri shareh. So if that's how you just define the gezerah of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, what are they going to do? You're going to say loud noise is asur, quiet noise is mutar. How loud is loud? How quiet is quiet? How much pain? Like I said the other day, 11. What were the words that we used? If you remember, anyone remember? When we ask that the Chachamim could not have made a gezerah that are almost impossible to be able to delineate, that's called natata divarecha l'shi'urin. You gave your words to shi'urim, to measurements. How are you gonna know exactly how loud is loud? How quiet is quiet? What, this kind of hammer, but not that kind of hammer? Like, what are you supposed to do? So Rav Chizda says, it can't be that was the line of demarcation in the Gezerah, because that would have led to chaos in the implementation of the Gezerah. Rav Chizda says, Lo kasha. No, not a question. Habe magale, the Mishnah, where we're talking about the carpentry work that's necessary for the doors, that's speaking about a certain type of a saw. Fine-tooth saw, as an example, doesn't make much sound at all. It just goes right back and forth, right? So the circular saw, or the one that was with two hands, or the one that kind of goes like this, any one like that, which is a fine-tooth saw, does not make much noise at all. Ha bechatzini, the other Mishnah is talking about axes, it's talking about massive hammers. So the differentiation that we're making is not between a lot of noise and a little noise, but practically no noise and very loud noise.
So you're categorizing it now, like into heavy stuff and lighter stuff, really.
Not heavy and light.
I don't mean heavy, but I mean very, very disruptive.
Like zero noise almost to a lot of noise. Okay?
So you could apply that to other things.
Just like in your mind, think of a very fine-toothed saw going back and forth. It sounds like a zipper. Now think of an axe into a tree. Now you're hearing it echo throughout the valley. Okay? Says the Gemara. Rav Papa Amar. So basically, it winds up being almost the same thing. The difference actually is that earlier, in the first opinion, the first tirutz of the Gemara, there was a lot more space in between that we kind of thought was allowed. Like the loudest was asur, but not, almost anything up to it. Comes Rav Chizda, and Rav Chizda says he moves the slider all the way. Like only the quietest of tools would be allowed after the Gezerah. So that's the difference between the two opinions. Okay? But also he deals with the issue of natata devarecha l'shiurin. Why? Because he leaves so much space between the two sides that it's not even a question anymore about getting it incorrect. Okay, now let's continue. So what would happen in Rav Chizda? You'd be able to use the kinds of tools that would be quiet, but not the kinds of tools that would make noise. Rav Papa gives a third answer. Kan kodem gezerah, kan acha gezerah. This case, this Mishnah that tells you you're allowed to do it, that was just before. It was stated before the time of Yochanan Kohen Gadol. The one that you just quoted from after Yochanan Kohen Gadol, that's after. So, simplest answer, and this is to me like mind-blowing, why the Gemara, didn't take the most obvious. I just want to hold up the question and the answer for you. Says the Gemara, how could this be? There's a Mishnah that says Rabbi Yochanan Kohen Gadol made a gezerah. Says the Gemara, it seems like from then and on it's asur, but from before then it was mutar, but from then on it's asur. So how could the Mishnah say that? What would be the obvious answer? The obvious answer is that the Mishnah was before. So Rav Papa's answer is like literally just the inverse of the actual question. The idea that we would go and start making the differentiations that the Gemara says in Rav Chizda in the first in the first answer of the Gemara, to me is very surprising, because I would have started saying, if I was writing Gemara, I would have thought that you'd start with Rav Papa, then you'd have the other answers. Why? Because we don't want that the Mishnah should be an irrelevant relic from before. We would rather have the Mishnah be something which is relevant still today. The Gemara continues now, a fourth answer. Rav Ashi Amar, Rav Ashi says, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda, okay? This Mishnah, that's telling you, right, of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, the Mishnah later on, that's Rabbi Yehuda. Now Rabbi Yehuda holds that anytime, we already saw Rabbi Yehuda, that whenever you're doing work on Chol Moed, you have to do it with a shinui, we said already. Rabbi Yossi, the second opinion is, right, that Rabbi Yossi, if you remember, we saw the Mishnah, and the Mishnah said, the other opinion says, no, you're able to do it as regular. You don't have to change anything in order to do it. So this Mishnah, our Mishnah, is talking about the idea, Rabbi Yossi, that if you have something you need to do, you're able to do it without any shinui. So therefore, if you don't have to do it with a shinui, do it as a regular uman, as a craftsman would. But if you have to do it with a shinui, so the opinion later on, that's going to be Yochanan Kohen Gadol, is going to be the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. T'amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi said, Man tana shinui b'moed b'davar aved, who holds that even in a scenario of loss, still you have to do a shinui, you still have to do it changed. Delok Rabbi Yossi, not according to Rabbi Yossi, Amar Ravina. Ravina said, Keman madlinan ha'idna kabyuta, Didasha bechula demuada. Now, whose opinion do we go according to that allows a person to put up the top of the door frame on Chol Hamoed? Kiman, ki Rabbi Yossi is according to Rabbi Yossi. So you see that Rabbi Yossi is the opinion that allows for work that's necessary to be done just in the way that it's usually done. It doesn't require a shinui to illustrate that it's cholo shel moed, and therefore do it in some other way. The Mishnah continues and ends. Kivashin shehu yachol echol moed. A person could eat something pickled on chol moed, whatever you want to eat. So anything that you're able to eat, you're able to pickle. Says the Gemara, I cannot help every time I read this Mishnah. I cannot help. The Gemara said, the Mishnah is telling you that you're allowed to pickle as much as you could eat. And all I can think of is that the person who wrote the Mishnah is Peter Piper. Peter Piper picked a pack of pickled peppers, right? And this is his moment to shine. Okay, says the Gemara, Bedita lebai kavira. Says the Gemara, one time we had a scenario that they were the Bedita was a river that they had, and Bedita lebai kavri. They were able to drain the river at a certain place, at Levi. What happened? Once that happened, once they got rid of the water, you had all the fish that were there for the taking. Azil kuli alma, tzud aitu kavra. Everyone went out and they went to go bring in all this excess fish. Shara lahu Rava lemimlach minayu. Rava allowed them to take some of them and put them in a salt water combination, like we said earlier. When we think of pickling, we always think of pickled foods, i.e. like cauliflower, pink cauliflower that Syrians like to eat, or whatever the case might be. That's what we think of, a pickle, But actually, pickling in ancient times was a method of preservation. It wasn't only for the sake of making a pickle. They would pickle many different things. All right? And that process of pickling would allow for the food or the fish or the chicken or whatever it was not to get ruined. So Rava allowed them not only to pickle for the holiday, but he allowed them to pickle also for after the holiday. Okay, and the question is. The question is, why were they able to do that if in the process of pickling, you basically make the food inedible? Because what happens is, in the initial moment of pickling, you get all the salt into the item, and that's what does the act of preservation. But that means that at this point, you can't use it. You have to wait for it to the process to complete, for it to dry out in order to be able to use it in a way which is it's edible. So Rava actually allowed them to do that. So the Gemara says, Nechila, I lost the place, hold on, find it. Right, so this is the question. The question that we always ask is, why should they be allowed to do it? It's a melacha on chol moed. Amalei Abaye said, didn't we learn kavashin shu yachol lechol nehem b'moed kovshin? Only whatever Peter Piper could actually eat, could he pickle. But anything that he couldn't eat, he should be allowed to pickle, because you're doing something on chol moed. And the Mishnah seems to say clearly that you're able to pickle whatever you could eat. So anything that you can't eat on the holiday, you would be able to pickle. So the Mishnah seems to contradict the ruling of Rava. Now, just understand, the reason why we're bringing this case of the river that was drained and the fish is because that created a scenario where they had all this excess fish that they could not use on the holiday. Okay? So they had more than enough, and they're going to lose this stuff, and it's davar aved, okay? So are they allowed to or not? Amaleh, Rava said, says something unbelievable. When they went out to get fish, what was their intention? They went out to get fish because they needed to eat. Vishavitlu, and if you left them over there on the ground, what would happen? Right? All that, all that fish would have gone, spoiled. Okay, and even if they brought it home and they didn't salt it, it would have spoiled. Says Rava, what do you mean? This is a classic case of merchandise that's going to get ruined. So since the merchandise is going to get ruined, we're not going to look at it as food, which you're preparing for after. We're looking at it as merchandise, something which is sellable. And therefore, since they brought it home with the correct intention, all right, they wanted to eat it with the holiday. Now they own it already. They brought it home correctly for the holiday, but now they have too much, and now if they just leave it, it's going to get ruined. So now they should be allowed to do it. And that's how Rava defended himself, okay, against the Mishnah that says kovshin, you're able to be kovesh as much as you need. All right? Let's continue. The Gemara says, V'ika da'amri. Another. Some people say, in other words, when we're talking about the situation, the story that happened, Sharilu Rava metzad mezel aituye umimlach. He held that they were able to go out and get the fish in order to bring them home and salt them. So in the first opinion of what Rava said, they brought them home legally, and now they had it, they owned it, and they owned it legally. So now they could salt it because it was something that they already owned that was going to get ruined. And we could look at it like something which is a prakmatia, something which is you have ownership over, that is going to get lost, and that's regular davar avid. But the second opinion says that he allowed them to initially go out and catch them for salting. So in other words, not for the holiday. Amalei Abaye says, didn't we learn in the Mishnah kovshan, that you're only able to pickle the ones that you're going to eat on the holiday, right? So how did you allow them to do that? Amalei, he said, Hani nami mitachle agav itzitza. You could also have eaten these fish, these same fish, right? If you would have pressed them, all right, to squeeze out whatever was in them. Kihad Shmuel, just like in the case of Shmuel, Abdul Shitin itzitze ve'achel. They pressed it 60. They did 60 different pressings of a fish that had a lot of salt in it. And then at that point, he was able to eat it. So since there's a tremendous amount of pressing that you could do, and then if you keep pressing it, eventually it will be viable to be able to eat on the holiday, okay? So therefore, since it's possible to be able to eat on the holiday, Rava said, that's why I allowed it. I allowed it because there is a possibility of eating it so long as you were to press it excessively. Okay, the number 60 is lav dafka, but it means that you pressed it a tremendous amount, okay? So that's why Rava allowed it. Says the Gemara, not only did this story of eating happen with Shmuel, happened also with Rava. Rava went to the house of the Resh Geluta. We already expressed what the Resh Geluta means. It means he was the person who was in charge of the whole Galut. So like not the chief rabbi, but more like the prime minister, okay? But they had a Resh Geluta. Geluta means that they're in exile. But there's still someone who was the head of all of the Jewish nation. In fact, the Resh Geluta oftentimes was also from the tribe of King David. So it was kind of like a king underneath the present kingdom. All right, so that's Resh Geluta. So Rava went to the house of the Resh Geluta. Avdile shitin itzitzi ve'achal. Same thing. They pressed the salty fish for him many, many times, and then he was able to eat it. Okay, so in that scenario, you see that not only did Shmuel eat it, I think the reason why the Gemara is why do they have to bring another story? Okay, you told me Shmuel ate it. Why do you have to bring another story with Rava? I think the answer the Gemara is kind of saying over here is that if Rava himself wouldn't eat such a type of fish, then he wouldn't be able to give such a ruling. Like maybe Shmuel had a very salty taste palate, and therefore he was able to eat it. In which case it would be asur for Rava to tell the people that they're able to do so because but not everyone can eat such a thing. The Gemara answers and says, no, Rava himself also ate salted fish that was pressed enough that it got the salt out, so it was edible on the holiday. So it was edible in that case, which would mean in this case it would be edible on the holiday. Rav ikla lebe Rav Shapir. Rav went to the house of Rav Shapir. Aitu lekanai hahu kavra. They brought in front of him this certain kind of a fish. All right, tilta bishula, tilta milcha, v'tilta tavya. They brought him one fish and they prepared the same fish for him in three different ways. One is bishula, was a mivushal in a liquid. The second was tilta milcha, was salted, and the tilta tavya in the third part, which was grilled. Okay, so they brought him the fish in three different preparation manners. All right. Ostensibly, the Gemara is again bringing this proof that you could have the salted fish if it's pressed, because otherwise they would not have brought him this food. Now, again, we have to keep asking ourselves, why is the Gemara just sharing with me, something? You know who else ate salted fish? This guy. You know who else? That guy. You know who else? Another guy. What is the Gemara adding over here? Each of these cases, it's adding something else. I believe it's adding with Rava, that it's expressing that Rava said this because, look, he even ate it himself. And it's not on Chol Moed. So it's illustrating that it wasn't something only that a person with a salty palate could be able to tolerate. Okay? The third example of Rav in the house of Rav Shapir, okay? I think this Gemara is adding, the piece over here is adding, is look, they prepared it boiled, they prepared it grilled, they prepared it with the salted approach where they squeezed it out. What it's trying to communicate is that, look, this was considered one of the valid ways of preparation. And the taste of it was close enough to something that would be desirable. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done that. You understand? If you have the other options of preparation, why would you prepare it this way? Unless it's not an inferior way of preparation. Is that clear? So I think that's the chidush that the Gemara is adding in this Rav Ikla Lebe Rav Shapir. And it's proven because it was sandwiched between two other standard methods of preparation. The Gemara says, Amarav, Rav said, Amali Ada Tzaida. Ada, who was the local fisherman, told him, Kavra Samuch Lemisreche Ma'aleh. The best time that a fish the best time is better to eat the fish is just before it goes off, which is fascinating to me. To read this Gemara, okay? We think that fish which is about to spoil is the one time when it has a lot of germs, right? Spoiled is gone. Right before it's spoiling, you're having bacteria, okay? So that's what we're assuming. In our days, what's the best way to eat a fish, right? At its freshest. So they're pulling the fish right out of the ocean. They're giving you ahi tuna. That's the best possible, way to eat it. But the Ada, the fisherman, was telling him the best way to eat the fish is actually right before it spoils. That's when maybe it tastes the best. Maybe that's when it has the roast item. Now, I remember reading this and I was thinking to myself, maybe Ada Tzaida is actually a very sneaky little boy. What's his business? He's a fisherman. The less fish that get thrown out, the more business he does. So he tells Rava the best time to eat the fish is right before it's spoiled. He's not going to get away with. But right before the spoiling, it sounds like maybe Ada is giving advice that maybe has a little bit of ulterior motive or an agenda driven. Okay, says the Gemara. The Amarav. And Rav said, Amali Ada Tzaida. Ada Tzaida also told me other things. Kavra Tavya Ba'ahua. What's the best way to have a fish, right? Is to have it with salt. The best way is to grill a fish with salt. And it's interesting, he called salt the brother of a fish. Which is interesting, right? Why would he call salt the brother of a fish? Fascinating. Because the salt is the only spice that is common to the nature of the fish itself. The fish is swimming in the ocean. Pepper is introducing something external. Salt is the only item that the fish ever swam in, okay? Because of the seawater, all right? So he says the best way to prepare fish is with grilling a fish with using its brother, okay? Asuke ba'avua. Then what do? You put it in its father. So you grill it with its brother. Who's the brother? Salt. Then you put it in its father. What's the father? Water. Okay? Michli bibire. And then you eat it with its son. What's the son? Whatever comes out of the fish, i.e. the juices of the fish that come out of the juice of the fish when you cook. By the way, anyone up for right now for going for some fish? I'm like starving right now. Ishti aleh avua. Huh?
I said caviar.
Caviar. By the way, he doesn't say that that's the son, right? So he says it's the broth, the juice of the fish. Ishti aleh avua. And then what do you have after you finished the meal? The best thing to do is to have water afterwards as well. Now, I just want to point out that this idea of ishti aleh avua is maybe saying something a little bit more interesting to chefs, and that is that we're really learning over here from the Gemara, like techniques in cooking, right? Aska be'avua, one of the opinions over here was that they would take the cooked fish, the grilled fish, with salt, and then they would put it in cold water. So I don't know if you're familiar with this idea, but I always thought that you take a steak off of the grill, slice it, beauty, right like that, when it's hot off the grill. Actually, anyone who knows anything about steaks will tell you that's a terrible thing to do. Really what you're supposed to do is put the steak on a plate and cover it. And then what happens? It's called resting. That's what you're supposed to do with a steak. That's what it says, right? And suddenly what happens? All the juices that are locked in come out, and then they're like reabsorbed in the meat itself. Now, again, why it works this way, I'm not getting involved. I'm allowing the steak experts to run the show. Ada, the fisherman, is now telling Rav the best way to do this, and he's telling you that after you grill it with salt, you then put it in cold water, okay? That locks in all the flavor, all right? Michli bibre, then you eat it with some of the broth of the soup. It just reminded me of the resting. And ishti aleh avu, and then you drink afterwards the water. So one of we definitely have to do this as a group activity. We need to try this. But some of the opinions say that this water that you're talking about is not just any water. You're talking about water, the same water from the same stream, from the same ocean. That's the kind of water that you should use for the cold, and as well for the drinking afterwards. Now, I just want to point out one other thing. It turns out that really what Ada is, the fisherman, was telling Rav, is that the best type of cooking is when a person uses the spices and the elements of the actual food's environment, the environment that it grew up in, that salt and that water, the fish itself has specifically designed to be able to integrate with those two things. So that kind of water and that kind of salt. Now, if you think, okay, water is water, salt is salt, okay, you obviously have no idea what you're talking about. I come from a family where everyone's very particular about which kind of water they like, da 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 da. By the way, my wife will tell you that when she gives her challah, she made her challah in Israel, or she made her challah in England, or she made her challah in New York, her challah in the 3 different countries tastes different, because the water is different. Fascinating, okay? So water has many, many different minerals and ingredients that make up the water, and that changes the properties of it. Salt is also very different. The salt properties of Himalayan salt are not the same as salt from Ibiza, as salt from all different places. And you go to certain chefs, they'll tell you that different kind of salt actually brings out. So over here, what Ada was telling him is to use the salt and the water that the fish came from itself. And Rav said, Amale Ada Tzaida. Last thing we hear from this guy, Ada the fisherman. I have one question. What the heck did Ada the fisherman do to get canonized and put in the Gemara forever and ever, that all of us will be sitting here and learning his fish recipes? Unbelievable.
Read fish in a rabbis, the Gemara.
Maybe. Sorry?
Saturday afternoon. He gave free fish.
Maybe he gave free fish. Maybe he was the first guy to make YouTube videos how to cook the fish. I don't know. Amar Rav. And Rav said, Amali Ada Tzaida told me, Kavra tachli v'chalba. So after a person has fish, okay, tachli v'chalba, which is a kind of cress. I don't know if you ever saw what cress is. It's like they make it in like a little. They make like a little shallow dirt, pot, and then the cress grows as a little thin stem, and it's got like 3 leaves at the top, okay, and it grows like a uniform height. Okay, so they would take kavra, fish, and then cress, tachli, v'chalva, and milk, lit'on gufa, v'lo lit'un puraya. That it is lit'un, means it's on top of the person, right? Lit'un, it's like carrying on him, but v'lo lit'un puraya, but he should not go to sleep. So in other words, what should he do after he ate those foods? He should make sure that he goes for a walk, he goes for a run. After eating those foods, you need to exercise. But you should not go to bed after you have those foods together. Now, I don't know how to say this nicely, but there's a big question about eating fish and milk or fish and cheese together. What's the question? The question goes like this. We have a Gemara that says that a person is not allowed to eat fish and meat. Okay? Comes the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch says you're not allowed, the Beit Yosef, you're not allowed to eat fish and cheese or milk. Okay? And then he says, and how do you know? Because look at that Gemara, that's the Gemara says it. The Taz, all the other commentaries said to the Beit Yosef, which is the same person as the Shulchan Aruch, by the way, Beit Yosef and Shulchan Aruch, same person, Rabbi Yosef Karo. He said, you quoted a Gemara, but the Gemara over there is not talking about fish and cheese or milk. It's talking about fish and meat. So it must be that the Beit Yosef, it was a mistake or a printing mistake, and it really should say that a person is not allowed to eat fish and meat, which is very well known. But many people hold that the Beit Yosef actually was correct, and fish and cheese or milk is asur. Okay? The Sephardim are split down the middle. Different communities have different customs. In the Syrian community, we hold you're not allowed to have fish and cheese, okay, or fish and milk. So I've never had a bagel with lox and cream cheese because it's fish and milk. All right. Chamovadia says that you're still allowed to have fish if it has with butter, just not with cheese or with milk. He also says that in a scenario where, let's say you went to a restaurant and you ordered something on the menu, you didn't realize it had milk or cheese in it. Okay, you did not realize. If you realize this is not the halakha. If you did not realize, call the waiter, you tell him, I'm sorry, I can't have the fish and cheese. The waiter says, tough nuggies, you already ordered, you have to pay for it. If a person is in a situation, b'di'ever, it's going to be wasted, well, he's already ordered it, and he didn't know, In that case, Chamovadia says you don't have to worry about it. You're still able to eat it. Now, I just want to point out. So everyone says, you see, the Shulchan Aruch, Bet Yosef made a mistake. He points at the Gemara. The other commentators say no. You know what he was saying? He was pointing to that Gemara, which talks about fish and meat, and telling you can't eat fish and milk. Why? He's saying, just like that Gemara tells you, that fish and meat is asur. Why? Because fish and meat to eat together is not healthy. So too, fish and cheese is not healthy. But when he pointed to that Gemara, he didn't mean to say, it says over there you can't eat fish and cheese. He's saying, you see that the Chachamim said that something which is unhealthy to eat together is asur. So also, fish and cheese is also asur. Okay? Interestingly enough, there are Ashkenaz poskim also that said it was asur. Pri Megadim also says that it's asur. Okay? Now, why am I mentioning all this? Because here you see a Gemara, the Gemara mentions eating fish and milk. And what does the Gemara say? Can't go to bed right after it. You need to go and run and go exercise because this food is not a food which agreed with the body naturally. So if maybe this Gemara is a source for how the Shulchan Aruch came up with this halakha about eating fish and milk. Last but not least, Ada Tzaida told me, Kavra tachli v'chalva, that if you have fish and this cress and milk, Maya velo shichra, okay, better to drink water but not beer. Shichra velo chamra. And if you have beer, you don't have water, better to drink beer than it is to drink chamra wine. Illustrating that wine was something that wouldn't agree with this combination. Or that beer wouldn't agree with this combination as much as water. But again, if you see that Ada is telling him that there's rules for the body, when someone is eating this together, don't have this, don't have that, don't have this, don't have that, make sure you go exercise. It's clear that it's not something which the body agreed with, at least on a surface level, and therefore maybe that's the source for this halakha. Hadran, alach, mashkin, bet hashelachin. Be'ezrat Hashem, we're going to come back to you, the perek of mashkin bet hashelachin. We've now finished the first perek of Moed Kattan. Hazaku Baruch.
Zach, who's down for some fish?
Oh my gosh, right now, I would definitely...
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Aren't they like overstepping their bounds a little bit with that? In other words, the fish and the milk, or if somebody, it's not healthy, they're saying. I mean, what happens if somebody does it, then it's like a little, in their right, in their individual, they're both okay, they're both kosher, but...
Yeah. Same like fish and meat, in the individual is kosher. But
why are they getting involved in that kind of a...
So it's a very good question. Let me give you the simplest answer. The simplest answer is that...
I can tell you shouldn't gain 10 pounds of weight.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like this is their domain, right? Doesn't sound like this is their domain. So the answer is actually...
We're all 40 pounds overweight, anyway.
Oh, no, not every. The simplest answer is actually that the pasuk in the Torah says, "V'nishmartem me'od nafshotechem," which means that a person must exceedingly guard their souls. And the Chachamim understood that to mean that a person has an obligation to do things only that are healthy, and they're not allowed to do things that are not healthy. That's the halakha. So, as an example, to put yourself in a sakana, many Chachamim held it's not only a bad idea, it's asur. In fact, for many, many years, they always taught that smoking after a meal was healthy for digestion. So everybody in the old times smoked. If you watch, by the way, old films, the men are smoking, the women are smoking, the kids are smoking, everyone thinks smoking. The cigarettes themselves are smoking, okay? Everybody's smoking, all right? What happens? All of a sudden they realize, biflage, it causes lip cancer and throat cancer and lung cancer and barf cancer, every kind of cancer, okay, is caused by smoking. The primary cause was by smoking. What was fascinating is that the great rabbis like Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman and other great rabbis, these are guys that were smoking 2 packs a day. He took a pack of cigarettes, they told him it was dangerous, not good for his health, threw it in the garbage, never ate, never smoked a cigarette again in his life. No patch, no weaning off, no hookah, no what's it called, Juul. Instant. It's not healthy, asur. So this was something also that was very important. And by the way, there are many rabbis today that are telling rabbis that now that we understand the links between obesity and longevity, right? There are many rabbis that are mandating. I remember growing up in yeshiva, they told us you have to go and exercise, you have to go and get in basketball or whatever the case might be, because it's imperative for one's health. Interestingly enough, that's the yeshiva system I came from. When I got to Israel, I went to a very strict yeshiva, and the rabbi held that sports was avodah zarah. Why? He said because when a person is playing competitive sports, they turn into an animal, they lose all of their midot, they're ready to chop the guy's head off, which I understand on some level, but that was not the way we were taught, so that was not the way, it was not the way I behaved. I was in the football team, and we actually won the championship, that year, that year, right? But the point is that there are people, he's not against exercise, happy for you to get exercise. He just didn't like competitive sports. But the yeshivot in America and the ones that we grew up with were actually very, very encouraging of it. In fact, you have a lot of yeshivot now that they take the boys in the summer, the first month of the summer vacation, they actually go to a camp, and the yeshiva has like leagues and they're playing all this kind of stuff. So they're actually seeing, and the best thing ever, by the way, Camp Morris, Camp Morris, exactly. And I have to tell you, one of the most profound things that I was ever able to do was when I was studying in the Kollel back in the day. I don't know if you guys remember where the Deal Kollel was back in the day on Wikipeko. You guys remember that? Anyone remember that?
Yeah.
Okay, so we would go out in between, study in the morning, and then it would be lunchtime break. Okay, I was living at the time in an apartment in Lakewood. I was there for a short time, married. You're not going to go home. You have an hour and a half to, by the time you get there, you're going to come back. So we would stay there and we'd have like lunch in the Kollel. You know what happened? Everyone would go outside, okay? They had a basketball court on the left side of the Kollel. Everyone would go outside and they would play basketball. And who was playing with us? I just want you to understand. Rabbi Diamond, Rabbi Shweki, Rabbi Nachmad, Alav Shalom, Lavdil. They were all out there. And by the way, you should just know, Rabbi Diamond had unbelievable court vision. Really, unbelievable. His passing game. Rabbi Shweki had the most ridiculous, he had a hook shot he could hit from half court. All right? So we grew up with this. And I think that one of the great benefits that the Syrian community has had growing up is that we were exposed to rabbis that were very, very normal. So everything that they were teaching and everything they were actually felt very accessible because of that. All right? Alamak, have a great one, Rabotai. God bless.
Enjoy. Get back soon.
Thursday?
Thursday, Be'ezrat Hashem, yes.
Safe trip.
Okay, bye-bye.
No Tuesday this week? Rabbi, no Tuesday this week?
No Tuesday. I'm flying Tuesday night.
Okay.
Mazal Tov again on a beautiful wedding.
Thank you. Mazal Tov.